Well, today in Egypt, funerals were held for the Coptic Christians killed in yesterday's Palm Sunday church attacks. 45 people were killed in 2 bomb attacks on Coptic churches. A so-called Islamic State has claimed responsibility. Now, Egyptian President Sisi has declared a 3-month state of emergency for the entire country. But the Coptic community says that move comes much too late, accusing the government of ignoring the warnings that this type of violence was inevitable.
Egyptian Christians bid farewell to their dead. They brought the coffins through the sea of mourners, one by one, 17 in total. All victims of a suicide bomb attack inside Alexandria's Coptic Cathedral on Palm Sunday. For some inside the church, the loss was too much to bear. This was an attack on one of the Christian calendar's holiest days. Each of the coffins bore the word martyr. In Tanta, a second suicide blast was even more deadly. At least 27 people lost their lives here. I'm very moved by what happened. May God take revenge on them. They ruined their holiday for them. Christians and Muslims were all brothers, were all one. I pray to God to avenge those who died. But grief is now turning to anger, though barriers have gone up in front of the church and the country is now under a 3-month state of emergency. For many, that's come too late. I want to ask President Sisi, why didn't you declare this state of emergency 2 weeks before the holidays? He's coming to do this now, but after the crime has happened. Security services are being deployed at churches across the country, but with IS promising more attacks, that will do little to calm the fears of Egyptian Christians.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Sarah Yerkes in Washington. She worked at the U.S. State Department during the Obama administration and is now a fellow at the Center for Middle East Policy at the Carnegie Endowment. Good afternoon to you, Sarah. So who's going to give the Coptic Christians the protection that is their constitutional right in Egypt?
That's a good question. I think that the Christians are very right to be angry and to be upset. ISIS has been warning that they were going to carry out similar attacks to this for months. They've carried out a series of attacks over the past couple of years. And frankly, the Egyptian government has done very little to actually protect them, both from a legal perspective and from a counterterrorism perspective. The state of emergency, while it will allow the government to enact a lot of harsh and repressive measures, it's frankly going to do very little to protect both the lives of Egypt's minority communities, as well as to allow them to be full citizens within Egypt.
So what you're saying is this state of emergency is more maybe window dressing, security window dressing, than anything that's really going to make lives safer for the Coptic Christians. So are we to assume then that more attacks are likely?
I mean, I think they are. There's a good chance we'll see more attacks. I think this is a priority of ISIS. They've been successful in the past. I think the security measures are more than just window dressing. They allow basically the government to kind of do whatever they want. They'll be able to conduct arrests without warrants. They'll be able to monitor people's communications. But the Egyptian security forces haven't been trained on counterterrorism. They don't have the necessary tools. They're not going to be able to prevent this sort of thing, even if they shut the entire country down, because the fact of the matter is that you have ISIS operating in Sinai, able to come into other parts of Egypt and carry out attacks. And I mean, that's the security side. On the other side, you have just continued persecution of minorities in Egypt by the government. And the bottom line is that the state of emergency is going to allow the government to continue to carry out monitoring of its citizens, shutting down media. One of the problems that we have right now with ISIS in Sinai is that the media is not allowed in to see what's happening. So we really don't even know what the situation is like on the ground.
And what's the relationship or what will become of the relationship between Coptic Christians and President Sisi? He has enjoyed support, at least from the church clergy, till this point, hasn't he?
He has, and in fact, he owes a lot of his a lot of support to the Coptic population in general. But I think over the past year, as you've seen, we had a very deadly attack, over 30 people killed in December. You had a series of measures in February that pushed and sort of forced some Coptic Christians to flee their homes in North Sinai. And now this, I think that the Coptic Christians have started to doubt their support for Sisi. And while their leadership might continue to support him fairly vocally, you're starting to see people angry, frustrated. The Egyptian government is not doing very much to protect them. And you have really this massive difference between what their rights are on paper and how the Egyptian government treats them in reality, and sort of their lives are not improved. They face tremendous discrimination at the societal level. You have, the disproportionately lower numbers of Christians within government, particularly within highly influential security positions. Mm-hmm. So I think that Copts have started to catch on that Sisi, he has a lot to say, a lot of great rhetoric about how he supports the Christian community, but in reality is not doing much to protect them.
The largest Coptic diaspora is in the United States, and I was thinking about what we saw last Monday. There was supposed to be this rebooting of the relationship between the White House and the Egyptian president. If you take all of that together, it should look good for Coptic Christians moving forward in Egypt. Can the U.S. role at all make a difference in the safety of Coptic Christians at home in Egypt?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, the Coptic diaspora in the United States is vocal. They've been out there. They have members of Congress that advocate on their behalf. And I think that, successive U.S. administrations, including this one, do care very much about this issue. The problem is that Sisi and his government say the right things. And I think, on paper, saying he's going to enact this state of emergency, this law that he believes will protect them, that kind of checks the box as far as U.S. lawmakers and the U.S. administration are concerned. So I think we're going to see more back and forth on this, where the U.S. diaspora is going to be louder and more vocal once Egyptians themselves, in Egypt, start to realize and start to kind of demonstrate that they no longer support Sisi to the same extent that they did before. You're going to see more of a pushback and more of a desire for the U.S. and others to hold Sisi to his word and to make sure that he actually does enact measures that protect Christians.
And what about within the Coptic Church? I was reading an article you wrote last summer in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. There were protests by Coptic Christians of persecution of Christians in Egypt, and the Coptic Church issued a statement in the name of the Coptic Pope denouncing those protests because they might cause harm to Egypt or greatly embarrass senior officials. How do you explain that? It's almost a love-hate relationship within the church.
Yes, I think, we've seen a growing divide between the church leadership and the people, particularly in the diaspora. And, part of that is, again, that Sisi is able to kind of calm their fears by saying the right thing. Now, that was before we had the December attack, before we had, some of obviously the attack that just happened on Sunday. So I think, the bottom line is that the Coptic leadership is no longer going to be as vocally supportive. It's going to be much harder, at least, for them to be as vocally supportive of the Sisi government. On the other hand, when you look at what's the alternative, and they suffered greatly under Morsi, under the Muslim Brotherhood, they'd much prefer a Sisi type of government to an Islamist-led government. So it's going to take a lot for the Coptic leadership to really cut off ties with the Sisi government. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But unless you start to see some real, we have very few people who've carried out these attacks have been prosecuted. Obviously, suicide bombers, it's a different story. But in some of the other attacks, arson, vandalism, the people who've carried out these attacks get away with it. The police are almost operating, without taking care of this. So you're starting to see now that people are catching on and they're getting frustrated with the inaction and the fact that these keep happening over and over again, despite the fact that the government says they're doing a lot.
Sarah Yerkes with the Center for Middle East Policy at the Carnegie Endowment. Sarah, thank you very much. We appreciate your insights.